The wind howled across the white plains like a memory that refused to die. Snow had erased sky from Earth until there was only a single color and the faint suggestion of direction, a smear of horizon drawn in ice. On that world, on Vespera's polar shelf where the storm belts never slept, a figure moved as a small dark stitch on a vast blank fabric, bent against the gale, boots crunching, the rhythm of breath a fragile metronome beating back the cold. He was alone, and it pressed on him like the sky. His name was Callen Ward, surveyor 3rd class and reluctant survivor, wrapped in a patched thermal coat and a scarf stiff with frost. From a distance he might have looked like any human in any winter, but the winds carried the bitter aftertaste of nitrogen and trace xenon, and the snow squeaked with a pitch that belonged to another star. His visor was fogged inside. He breathed slow, conserving heat and the will to keep moving. His shuttle had burned out 2 days ago. A whiteout swept the landing zone into nothing. The beacon inside the wreck now pulsed beneath a roof of snow like a buried heart. Callen mapped bearings by instinct and the stubborn angle of wind-bent rock, seeking the emergency cache at Ridge 43, step and step. He counted each footfall. He spoke aloud sometimes to keep his voice company. Left, right, don't sit, don't stop, just move. Visibility thinned further. The storm climbed. And then, like a shape that had peeled itself from the snow, a dark curve resolved at the base of a low drift. Callen almost missed it. Another few meters and it would have been one more immovable contour in a landscape sculpted by cold. He stopped. The curve was not rock, not ice. It was glossy, blue-black, marked with geometric grooves and pale frost cracks. He knelt, pushing snow aside with gloved hands that had forgotten every sensation but pressure, and revealed a face the color of sapphires, eyes closed, lashes rimmed with glittering ice. Her skin gleamed faintly as if cut from polished stone and wired with light. A crown of braided filaments arced from her scalp, faint points of electric blue dying in the storm. Callen looked around as if the world would object. It was just him and the wind and this woman half buried in winter like a lost secret. "You alive?" His voice broke in the helmet, thin and human. He brushed more snow away. Armor, iron gray and segmented, hugged her body in smooth plates etched with unfamiliar patterns. He found a collar ring at her throat, mag-clipped to a broken chain. He found a fracture in a breastplate, heat scars radiating from a central point. Something had hit her. She had hit the snow. Her eyes snapped open. He flinched. They were all iris, luminous and deep, a color somewhere between stormlight and cobalt fire. She stared up at him and tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. There was a crisping frost on the edges like sugar, and when she inhaled it wheezed like ice shards rubbing. "Hey, easy." He reached for his canteen, then remembered it was slush and worse than useless. He had heat. He had one thing in short supply on the entire shelf. He stripped off his jacket, the only warmth between him and the void, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Cold knifed him immediately, merciless and impersonal. He ignored it. He tucked the jacket close, sealing fabric around plated armor that should have felt like hugging a machine, but he felt the minute shiver that passed through her frame. Not a machine then, not entirely. "Don't," her voice was a brittle note. "You'll die, not if we stand up." He offered his hand. It looked absurd beside hers, flesh and glove versus smooth blue skin traced with hairline conduits. She hesitated like someone unused to being offered anything. Then she reached, and the cold of her fingers bit through the glove and into his bones. He hauled, and she rose from the snow as if pulled from a second birth. He slipped an arm under her shoulders, taking the weight, lighter than he expected. The armor was smart, redistributing balance. Together they found the lee of the drift and crouched as a gust tried to shove them back into the past. "What do I call you?" he asked. She blinked slow. "I have designation. It is not for peers. I'm Callen." "Callen," she said carefully as if this was a new species of sound. "I am Taliath." She swallowed her breath like glass and added, "Ward Callen, there is a transmitter beacon, my people, they will come." The last word was not certain. It was a wish disguised as logic. Better chance of everyone coming if we reach a ridge. He checked the compass. He couldn't afford detours. He also couldn't afford humans being what the galaxy remembered, the species that walked past strangers when the wind rose. "We go together, lean on me." "I can move," she said, pride a spark even under frost. "Good," he said, relieved by something he couldn't name. "Let's move." They walked. The storm had moods, tantrums, and sullen mutters. It screamed often. Snow stuck to eyelashes and froze them into heavy shudders. Their world shrank to the meter of ground before their boots and the invisible rope of force between their shoulders, tugging them forward and forward in an endless present. Callen's skin by degrees became something stiff and remote, like armor of his own. He imagined the ridge like a myth. At the second hour she stumbled and stopped. He could feel her shaking through the jacket, through the plates. Her glow had dimmed to an ember. "Don't sit," he said, "not here." "I must slow heat loss." Her words came even clinical. He looked around and found nothing but snow, except one dark seam in the drift that the wind had carved. He dug with his gloves and scraped metal on ice. A crashed sled, half buried, its cargo bay warped open to the sky like a frozen mouth. Shelter. He almost laughed. Inside, with the mouth turned against the wind, they were in a different world. A hollow bowl where the gale became a tired animal at the door. He sealed the torn lid with a strip of foil from his emergency kit and glued it with chemical patches. It would not last hours. He needed only minutes. He fired a thermal pellet on the floor. It hissed, snow wetting into water that steamed and then dried into a faint warmth like breath. Taliath stared at the pellet flame as if it were either salvation or insult. Her eyes had retracted to a human-like scale, dimmer, the luminous ring thin. Callen knelt and rubbed her arms through the jacket. The impulse surprised him. It was oddly intimate, caring without permission. He would have done it for any freezing stranger. This one simply came from a horizon he had never imagined. "You found me," she said after a time. Her voice was smoother. The ambient heat licked at their cheeks. "Why?" "Because I was there." He watched the flame. "Because you were alone, because I know what cold does." He remembered an outpost on Europa station where the power had failed. He remembered the way silence had a temperature. She studied him from the side. "Humans are said to triage the universe. Friend, foe, other. You saw me and thought friend. I saw you and thought alive," he said. He opened a ration packet with clumsy fingers, offered a square of concentrated nutrient. "Eat. If your biology eats this." She accepted it the way a queen might study a stone. She sniffed it. She tasted. Something in the corner of her mouth eased. "It passes," she said, which he understood as edible. They ate in that hollow, two different kinds of hunger fed by the same ugly block. The flame burned down. The patched lid trembled with a rising gust like a massive hand pushing on the universe. Callen checked his comp again. Ridge 43 was still a line in a never-ending blank. He could feel the cold pooling under the heat, like a tide waiting for the moon. "We go," he said. Taliath nodded once. When he reached for his jacket, she caught his wrist. Her fingers were warmer now. It shocked him more than the cold had. "Keep it. You need it. So do you." He weighed the calculation and found it equal. He left the jacket where it was around her. She fastened it high, the collar framing her angular jaw. Somehow it made her look less alien and more like someone's ally. They stepped back into the gale. The world did not care that they had briefly found a hole in it. It raged without malice, step and step. Down a shallow swale where the snow feathered into ripples, up the gentle climb to an unkind plateau. The flurries thickened and the light went from gray to a thinner gray, the prelude to night. The planet turned and they were small on its face. "Tell me," she said suddenly, breath turning to ghost strings in the air, "of your home. I require noise." Noise. A mind is quieter when it knows another voice. Your voice has texture." He almost smiled in the wind. "Earth is warm sometimes," he said, and told her about monsoon rains that came like a drumming army over the delta, and how the streets gleamed in evening light with the reflection of 1,000 city signs. He told her about the slow places too, the dry hills where wind pushed at grass and everything smelled like sun. He told her about cinnamon and rubber and corrosion and old books that held the scent of human hands. "What do your people sing?" she asked. "Old things, simple, about leaving and returning." He paused, unsure if he was wasting breath, but stories were warmth too, so he hummed a fragment of a fisher's song his grandmother had loved, a tune that lilted like a boat moving through shallow waves. The words were ghost-thin on his tongue. Taliath listened with her head slightly tilted, like snow listening to gravity. When she spoke again, the wind had fallen briefly to a whisper. "My people do not sing," she said. "We transmit histories. They live inside us in lattice storage near the bone. They are clean. They do not leak." "Clean isn't always human," he said, "not unkind." "Perhaps," she murmured. They were still moving when night arrived, not with darkness. The storm made sure there had never been real light, but with a temperature drop that hit like a blade, measurable in the bones. Callen's calves ached with the precision of knives. His lungs burned. He did not notice when his fingers went from pain to something worse. They reached a line of dark shapes that the wind had etched into narrow arches, sastrugi, as humans called them, long sinuous dunes of pack ice hardened into waves. Taliath touched one with 2 fingers. "This will shelter," she said with certainty. The human in Callen wanted to question and plan. The animal in him wanted to curl up and close his eyes. He followed the alien's instinct. They tucked into the hollow verge and he activated his second thermal pellet. As the faint glow grew, he saw that her armor had hairline cracks at her ribs whose pattern mirrored the sastrugi. She seemed built to reflect the world where she had hoarded memory. The hum under her skin had strengthened with heat like a machine warming. "My designation is Taladra Ithren, 3rd lattice bearer of the chorus of Casimir." She said it softly like a code that might open a door no one else could see. "Taliath is the name I liked when I heard children say it." "How did you end up in the snow?" he asked. She looked down. "I refused to kneel," she said simply. "For who? For my makers and for yours." The small glow fire caught in her eyes. "There is a contract between your corporation and our foundry. They make soldiers, you provide ore and currency. We are designed to survive many climates, but not this, not forgotten." He felt a slow anger that had the same temperature as the storm. "They left you." "Left is a gentle word. I was discarded. I defected from a war that wants to become every story." She touched the crack on her armor as if she could read it like a page. "I ran from a ship, there was a raid, I fell, I walked, then I stopped. And I walked past," he said, realization bending his voice. "You walked toward, they were quiet. The world outside clawed at the hollow, the pellet hissed. The smell of hot metal and cold air made a thin border between survival and everything else." Callen felt sleep like a tide at the edge of his mind. He set an alarm that chirped a harsh tone every 5 minutes to keep them awake and to remind him to tap toes and fingers to fight back the creeping numbness that felt like peace. At some point between the alarms she spoke again, voice bare. "I was made to remember. I have the history of my line inside me, every choice, every face. I could walk in warmth and feel nothing but the weight of other lives, but the cold," she closed her eyes. "The cold took everything. There was room in me for fear. And then you, and there is room now for something I do not have language for." "Good," he said, because words were hard like ice and just as fragile. "Good." The second pellet burned down, they moved again. It happened at dawn, a watery change in the pale that meant somewhere else the star had some strength left. The wind eased. The storm drew breath. and the ridge's dark scar appeared at last like a knife slash at the world's edge. Callen felt a surge so fierce it nearly made him reckless. He wanted to run. He did not. He kept the pace they could maintain, which was the same lesson as love and warfare. They reached the ridge and found a column of rock like a broken tooth jutting from the ice, basalt black under a lace of rime. Someone like Callen, another day, another storm, had bolted a small steel box to that rock with the emblem of the Survey Corps etched shallow, a deliberate mark on a rude earth. Callen opened it with hands that shook. Inside, the emergency kit. He almost wept. Thermal blanket, dense caloric gel, 2 more heat pellets, a beacon flare, a micro-welder, a water pack, a little book of stupid jokes they slipped into every cache because life was cruel enough. He worked in quiet urgency. Heat pellet first. He snapped the cap and the metal cylinder bloomed into a thorough warmth that bit the cold back like a beast driven from a fire. The smell was sharp and friendly. He wrapped Taliath in the thermal blanket under his jacket. Her plates took a warmer tone, faintly iridescent like oil under snow. Better, she exhaled and closed her eyes. He placed the beacon flare inside the ridge shadow and triggered it. A column of near-invisible signal shot up, pure and mechanical. It would call any rescue craft with sense and decency. He had neither craft nor guarantee. He had time, buying it with every heat pellet. He drank water that tasted like metal doors at a train station. He took a gel packet, it slid down like a dare. He told himself to stand only after he'd sat for 6 minutes. He stood. As the warmth steadied them, the world expanded again beyond mere survival. He looked around. He saw, far across a white bowl, the black pins of machine towers, small as teeth on a comb, a mining line. "Shelter there," he said. "Maybe comms." He pointed. "Half day at our speed." "Your beacon," Taliath said, nodding to the flare. "Your people will come. Maybe." His mouth felt dry. "Maybe yours." She watched his face for a beat, and something like apprehension moved under her gaze. "If my people come, they will label you uncalibrated variable. Humans save for leverage or possession. You saved for noise." "Did I? I am learning your words," she said. He laughed once rough, and it lifted something heavy inside him. "Well, Taliath Wren, 3rd lattice whatever, let's teach each other more words." They set out again, warmed and human enough to feel pain like a friend who complains but helps you lift the couch. The snow smoothed into a gentler field here, the wind shadow of the ridge holding. The mining towers grew by increments until they were the size of knuckles, then the size of carried weapons. They began to feel watched, which was sensible. Automated minds were paranoid by design. When they came within 100 meters, a lens on the nearest tower flicked a red diode. "Identify," said a flat voice, tin on wind. "Surveyor 3rd Class Callen Ward, IDC 8449, requesting shelter and communications." "Invalid," the tower said, apparently not built to believe much. Taliath stepped forward. The jacket changed how she looked, softer, less invader. Her voice when she spoke held a tone that seemed to knuckle directly into the tower's sensor suite, an engineered overtone. "Taladriath Wren, Chorus Lattice, override path 6-1. The lens flickered uncertainly. Processing. Callen held his breath. He could taste battery acid in the wind, which meant the tower's internal cells were ancient and failing, an old install. Sometimes luck wore the face of neglect. "Override accepted," the tower said reluctantly, and a low door in its base unsealed with a sigh. Warm air spilled out, carrying the smell of oil and long-dead plants from the tower's oxygen recycler. Callen felt dizzy at the first lungful. Inside was cramped, a maintenance cavity stacked with drums and coils, the walls a tangle of aged wires like a forest of inert vines. A single bench, a heater, a console. Callen pulled the door closed and stood panting, hands on thighs, as warmth moved through him like an apology. Taliath leaned against the wall and shut her eyes. The blue in her braids brightened. "Comms," he said, and stumbled to the console. He wiped a sleeve across a layer of dust. The screen, to its credit, woke, and the garbage of an ancient operating system filled the display, colors like toys, fonts like a forgotten ad. He felt a fierce tenderness for it. "Local net," he said, and punched through menus. "No orbital. We can bounce a distress ping at least." He sent the ping. He sent it again. He sent coordinates. He sent a note, "Human and one unknown alive. Send help." He added, because he was human, "Please." The tower thought about it. Outside, the wind prowled like an animal without teeth. When he turned, Taliath was watching him in silence, something complicated in her gaze. "You did not ask what I am," she said. "I saw you," he said. "That's enough ask for the next year. You are a strange vector." Quantifiably. Her lips parted slightly, a smile, he realized with a shock, a species general smile. Then the console beeped. A blinking message scratched across the screen like a note scrawled on a fogged bathroom mirror. "Distress received. ETA unknown. Systems limited." "There's a transport within range," Callen said, reading the metadata. "Skeleton crew, privateer, looks like they'll want payment. I'll give them coordinates and an IOU." "I have currency," Taliath said. "Knowledge. They cannot spend it, but it buys." He covered the mic with his palm and leaned a shoulder to the console, facing her. "If they come, they'll see you," he said. "Contracts will wake. The world will try to take you apart or return you. We can handle that if you want, or we can leave before they get here and aim for the crater city 2 days south. There are places to disappear." "Do humans disappear?" she asked. "Every day. And return." "Sometimes." She considered this with a focus that felt like being looked at by a mind built to hold libraries. "I am tired of being property in the present tense," she said. "I prefer problem in the future. We should go south. We'll leave a note. What will it say? That we were here and we were alive," he said, and smiled without humor. And that life went on. They rested for an hour. Taliath showed him how to hook her plates to the tower's power cell. It hummed and he watched readouts creep upward. He had never in his life felt more protective of a series of numbers. He laughed at himself and didn't stop. They wrote the note anyway. He typed it into the log, short and human. He added a line, "If you find this, take what you need and bless the next traveler." It was the kind of thing one said to make meaning, and for once the cliché felt like a tool and not a lie. They left the tower and turned south. The wind took a different tone in that direction, deeper, like a giant exhaling in sleep. The sky grew briefly and revealed a pale sun like a coin. The snow cracked beneath them with small pleasing sounds. Callen taught Taliath to judge the quality of drift by sound, the squeak for powder, the hiss for sheet. She taught him the difference between 3 kinds of silence that had names in her language. One for absence, one for waiting, one for peace. They crossed a river they could not see, only felt. The snow hummed faintly underfoot, a whisper vibration, and Taliath said in a low tone, hollow, slow. They stepped slow. The snow layered in a crust to hide the gap, and once Callen's boot broke through and he felt a drop like a trap opening in a stage, cold black beneath. Taliath caught his pack strap and hauled him back with a force that felt mechanical, until her hands lingered a second longer on his shoulder than design would require. They rose to a plateau and saw the crater city at last, a ring of broken towers around a wide bowl. Not the silhouette of civilization, but the ghost of one. The corporation had chewed profit from this place and left it to weather back into geology. Callen felt a rage like a fuse. Taliath stood with arms folded, reading the lines of ruin like a true archaeologist. "There are shelters in the sublevels," she said, "heat pockets, water lines, perhaps food processors if not stripped." "Company abandoned her pretty completely," Callen muttered. "Abandonment is another word for a story without an ending." She started down the slope. "Let us write an end for us." They reached the bowl at dusk, which had the color of ash. They found a service hatch half buried and wrenched it open with a lever from the ridge kit. The air that bloomed out was stale and sweet. the scent of old circuitry, of layered dust. Inside, their lamps drew sharp ovals on concrete. The sublevels felt like sleeping cathedrals, their high ceilings ribbed by conduits, their floors strewn with relics of work. A locker room where names were still tied with magnets to metal doors. A canteen whose dispenser croaked but still poured out something thick when Taliath coaxed life into it, her fingers humming against a maintenance panel like a musician finding an old song's key. The thing tasted like soup stripped of flavor until only calories remained. It was miraculous. They ate sitting on the counter. Their breathing echoed. The heaters in the walls coughed. Callen felt fingers again, prickling painfully as blood reclaimed them. Taliath watched a drip at the edge of the counter with narrow focus, the liquid suspended, elongating, letting go. Her eyes were almost curious. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She looked up. "The cold or the rest?" "Both," she considered. "I am designed to endure. Pain is a message from body to mind. I categorize it." She lifted a shoulder slight. "This one today is informative." He laughed softly. "Informative, that's one way to say it." "You are curious too," she said. "Humans are made for it. You endure because you are made to wonder what happens if you do." "We endure because we're too stubborn to make a better plan," he said dryly. "But sure, wonder helps." "Is that why you sing when you're alone?" she asked. He stiffened. "I didn't know you could hear that." "I hear into bone," she said, "but I will not listen where I am not invited." "You're invited," he said after a beat and looked at the failed soda line as if it were a horizon. "Any time." They used a maintenance closet as a berth. Callen lay with his back to the wall, Taliath sitting cross-legged by the door, staring into darkness like it was data. He almost asked if her people slept, then decided the question was too intimate and that he'd already given enough offense to the day. He closed his eyes. He woke to his own nightmare of cold, heart galloping, throat raw. "Callen," she said gently, not a question. Something in the way she said it soothed the adrenaline like the hand of a friend. "It is warmer." He realized it was true. The sublevel had warmed like an old animal. He thought of the ship in the sky that might be coming and couldn't decide whether to hope. They spent the next day mapping the sublevels, making a route to the surface that named their maze. Corridor 1 became the rib, Corridor 2 the angel. A ruined bay the stomach because it smelled like old cooked things. Taliath found a power matrix labeled in a dialect that made the tower's language seem like crib notes. She hummed her voice into the panel and the lights shivered on in a few scattered rooms, splotches of brightness like luck. "Your voice is a key," Callen said, watching the back of her head as the light bathed her in pallor and blue. "To what else?" Once, she stopped. The hum thinned. She put her palm on the panel face like a person pressed to glass. "Once the Foundry sang a whole galaxy into shape. We were their instruments. We hold the echo of that in our throats." "But you defected," he said quietly. "Yes." She looked over her shoulder. "I became dissonant. Did it cost you?" "Everything," she said, and did not look away. He nodded. "We should find weapons," he said after a time. "Just in case the rescue that comes isn't kind." They found a cutter and a bolt rifle in a locker wrapped in cloth that had an old smell of the men and women who'd put them there. Callen checked the rifle the way his father had taught him, with a tool that wasn't a rifle, a gentle patience. He loaded it. He strapped the cutter to his belt. He felt like someone in an old story and hoped that story would not demand blood from his pages. They slept again. A sound woke Callen from a dream that had the color of winter, a metallic vibration that drilled into the concrete. He sat up. Taliath was already standing. Her head was tilted, the braids at her skull lit faintly like stars pinned in a pattern. "Landing," she said. "Rescue, or inspection, or a wolf, or," she spread her hands. "It is a ship. I do not know its heart." Callen's heart thudded anyway. He put on his gear. He checked the rifle again. He looked at her. "We'll go together." "Together," she repeated, and there was a shape around the word like a structure had been built around it while he wasn't looking. They climbed. The air cooled as they rose, the planet rediscovering their existence. In the access corridor under the eastern rim, they came to a slit that looked out over the crater bowl. Callen lay on his stomach and peered into light. The ship was slate gray and ugly, a box with pretensions to aerodynamic virtue. It had landing skids like a spider's legs and a hull patched with plates from different eras. Privateer, yes, but not corporation. Independent, that could mean kindness. It could mean anything. A figure disembarked, wrapped in furs and breathing a cloud. Two more followed, one carrying a long antenna array. They trudged through the snow toward the sublevel hatch like characters in a different piece that had accidentally wandered onto this stage. Taliath lay down beside him, shoulder touching shoulder. He felt the hum that lived under her skin, steady, calm. "If we engage," she said, voice quiet, "we do not have to win, we must only buy choices." "I like the way you think." He swallowed. The figures reached the hatch. They placed a device on the seal and the lock's light turned green. The door opened a crack. Warm air rushed out and made a halo around the strangers. "Let's meet them," Callen said. "Better to choose a face than wait to be chosen." They descended and took positions in a cross corridor. Callen kept the rifle low. Taliath stood at the angle where the light fell, jacket zipped high, armor only partly visible, a woman in winter, not a weapon. He admired her poise. It contained both steel and mercy. He decided that if he lived past the next hour, his journal would try to capture that and would fail. Footsteps approached. The first stranger rounded the corner, and Callen saw a human face under the fur hood. Eyes cautious, mouth set to neutral, a scar across the left cheek like a fine line of pencil. The stranger froze at the sight of Taliath and then flicked a glance at Callen's rifle without moving the head. The posture screamed training. The second stranger was taller, antenna array slung like a surfboard, gaze darting like a nervous animal's. The first spoke. The voice was female, husky. "Got a ping. Distress, that you?" "Yeah," Callen said. "Callen Ward, surveyor. Shuttle went down," he gestured. "Needs extraction." The woman's eyes cut back to Taliath and did a quick scan that was not pure curiosity. "What is she?" "Alive," Callen said evenly. Taliath spoke before the stranger could respond with contract language. "Taladru-Ithren," she said, and let the resonance in her voice pour like a translucent veil over the corridor. The air itself took on a shimmer. The antenna man flinched. He was sensitive to frequencies. The leader did not. She blinked, slow. "Your Foundry," she said. "Thought I smelled machine him." "Defector," Taliath said. "Independent, what are you to the corporation?" The leader asked. "A variable." "I like variables," the woman said. She lowered her weapon. "I'm Captain Redow, ship hauler's dream. My crew take coin, favors, IU, back scratches, and the occasional song. Your distress is among the better we've heard this cycle. We can take you to the orbit ring. After that, someone else's scandal." Callen felt hope and caution mix into a potent solution. "You'll take us both." "I didn't come to split pairs," Ree said, but her face hardened subtly. "The ring runs on contracts and fear. If I dock with Foundry property on board, my fee doubles and my problems triple." "I am not property," Taliath said. "Tell that to the ring." Ree looked between them. "If you can pay now, with something that keeps my crew in food and bolts, I'll risk it. If you can't, I can take the human and pretend I didn't see you. Those are my two kindnesses." The choice hit like a cold wave. Callen opened his mouth. Taliath's hand touched his sleeve. "I can pay," she said. The hum under her voice deepened. She stepped forward. "But I pay with something that will put your ship on rails no machine can hack. You accept you will never tell anyone my name. You will never transmit a sample of my voice. You will erase this transaction from your logs and your mind. Will you take a vow to that effect?" Ree looked like someone presented with a map to a labyrinth where treasure also contained wolves. "I don't take vows lightly." "Neither do I," Taliath said. Ree stared long, weighing. The antenna man licked his lips. The third crew member, small, quiet, no weapon, eyes like a child's and an old man's at once, said nothing. Fine, Ree said finally. Offer. Taliath reached up and unlatched a plate at her throat. Beneath it was not muscle or wire but a shallow cup of faint blue light that flickered like a thought. She sang. It was not loud. It was a strand pulled from a larger thing, a slice of a cord. The sound touched the air. The tower's old heaters shifted tone. The dust motes in the corridor made slow spirals as if set to a clock. The hair on Callen's arms lifted. He felt, for one strange second, like a needle settling on a record that had been turning since before he was born. Ree's eyes widened. The antenna man shivered as if someone had walked over his grave. The quiet third crew member whispered, harmonic lattice alignment. Taliath closed the plate. Your ship will sing smoother, she said. Your life support will not glitch in sub-zero cycles. Your airlock doors will not hesitate mid-stroke. Your neural interfaces will mesh without static. You will move through space like a needle through cloth. Ree swallowed hard. Deal, she said, voice hoarse. Consider it paid. They moved quickly after that, their breath fogging in mutual urgency. In the hangar, the hauler's dream was cramped and homely, a machine that had survived more by attitude than by design. Callen ducked under ribs. Taliath moved like a cat that had learned new gravity. The crew strapped them in and warmed the throttle. Ree rechecked the vow by looking Taliath in the eye and nodding once deeply. Taliath nodded back. Human and alien, oath and hum. The ship rose, shook, settled, and climbed out of the crater like a thought clawing its way from sleep. Through the small square of a window, Callen watched the white bowl shrink into a shape on a planet that did not care what stories humans told. His chest felt too big for his ribs. He realized that he had been living these last 2 days on a knife's ridge that separated now from never, and that stepping onto a ship did not mean stepping off that knife. It only meant the landscape under it changed. Ree's grin was barbed wire and amusement. You're a stubborn breed, she said, glancing at Callen. I've hauled humans before. You people run on fumes and spite. We run on promises, Callen said quietly. He looked at Taliath. She returned the look without flinching. Orbit ring in 20, Ree said. Settle in. If we get a ping from Foundry, we all become ghosts. They didn't get a ping. They got silence that meant the world was listening too hard. The ring grew in the window, a bright thread dotted with traffic, planet light washing the segments pale. Hauler's dream banked and approached a dock that looked like the mouth of a wary animal. It wanted to bite and also wanted to be fed. As they neared, warning lights triggered inside the cabin. Taliath straightened. Ree swore. What now? The quiet crew member pointed. Boarding spikes, they said, voice dead calm. 2 no, 3 craft, private security, colors unclear. Callen felt his stomach drop. Taliath's hand on the armrest closed into a fist. Ree's jaw clenched. Probably nothing, she said with the cheerful tone of a surgeon. But we'll also assume it's everything. The ship's speakers clicked. A voice like slick plastic oozed through. Unidentified hauler, you are carrying Foundry property without authorization. Cut engines and prepare for inspection. Failure to comply will trigger seizure. Ree flicked her eyes to Taliath. Taliath met her gaze. We cannot run, she said, but we can choose where to stop. Ree grinned like a gambler. I like you. She toggled a channel. Control, this is Hauler's dream, requesting emergency berth for hull cooling. We've got a reactor anomaly. She cut the line. They'll let us in, they like not getting debris on their pretty paint. The docking bay opened like a grudging mouth. The hauler slid in, skating. The security craft followed, cocky on their control. The bay doors shut. Atmosphere equalized. The clamps bit. The air changed temperature like a mood swing. Okay, Ree said, standing. Callen, you know how to look harmless. I can try. Do that. Taliath, hide. I am not good at hiding, Taliath said. Then be a rumor, Ree said, and pointed to a maintenance alcove. We'll stall, you run. Taliath looked at Callen. The look was needle-sharp and full of 1,000 words they didn't have time to learn. Together, she said. Together, he answered. The hatch earized open. 3 security officers swaggered aboard with the confidence of men who had made bad decisions into uniforms. Their armor had the Foundry crest and the corporation's double ring. The leader smiled without warmth. "Cargo manifest," he said to Ree, gloved hand extended. "And your guest?" "Cargo manifest says rocks and hope," Ree said. "Take your pick." The officer's smile faltered an inch. He stepped further in and saw Callen standing, hands visible, rifle nowhere, expression casual, and his gaze flicked past to the shadows where Taliath was not quite hiding. He went still. Weapons rose as naturally as breath. "You," he said, "kneel." Taliath stepped forward instead. Her voice filled the ship like a flock rising from a field. "This ship is under my protection," she said, and the note she chose bent nerves like wires, pulled emotion like string. The leader staggered as if tripped. The 2 officers behind him winced. The one on the left raised his gun anyway. Callen moved without permission, put his shoulder into the man's ribs, bucked him against the bulkhead. The gun went off, the bolt punching a scar into the ceiling, thudding back. The sound was big enough to feel in the teeth. Ree's quiet crew member dropped like a shadow, sweeping the legs of the 3rd officer with the calm efficiency of someone who had practiced deadly ballet. The leader recovered fast. His weapon came up steady and pointed directly at Taliath's chest. Callen turned, breath ragged. He had no shot. He had only his voice, which was not designed for war. "Don't," he said. It was quiet, but he put everything he had ever survived into that word. The drowning on Europa, his mother's last breath in a place with no windows, the white plane and the jacket in the snow. Maybe Sound remembers. The leader's finger tightened. Taliath did not move. She looked not at the weapon, but at the person holding it, and her voice changed pitch, a hair turned gentle. "Do you know what it means to be free?" she asked the man. His face wavered. The gun trembled. Outside, alarms blared. Inside, something raw and human made a decision. The man lowered the weapon 2 millimeters. It wasn't forgiveness. It was fatigue. It was a fraction of eternity. Ree moved like a thrown knife, striking the man's wrist with the edge of her hand. The gun went clattering. The quiet crew member pinned the 3rd officer with an economy that was almost funny if bodies weren't involved. The 2nd officer groaned in the corner, his breath fogging the floor. "Out," Ree snarled. "All of you out. We were never here. You never saw us." The leader looked up from the floor. Blood traced his lip. He stared at Taliath with an expression that had too many things in it to name: awe, fear, envy, a regret he would not admit. He stood. He nodded once, not to Ree, but to Taliath. Then he led his men out. The hatch shut. Ree leaned on it, panting. Callen pressed his back to the bulkhead and slid down until he was sitting. Taliath crossed to him and crouched. Her face was composed, her eyes bright. "You said don't," she murmured. "It's what I had. It was enough." Hauler's dream undocked with the casualness of experts refusing to admit how close they had come to annihilation. They drifted to a shadow segment where the ring's inner lights made a river of gold. Ree turned in her seat and looked at her guests, measuring them a final time. "This is where I usually demand payment," she said, "but I am not sure what you gave me can be priced." "You can price my IOU," Callen said. "Find me in the core registry and send the bill." "I will," Ree said, and her grin held an affection he had not expected. "And I hope you survive long enough to pay it." Taliath stood like a statue made of breath. "There is a place below the ring," she said. "An old dock. Smugglers use it to exchange things. From there are ships that ask fewer questions." Ree raised an eyebrow. "You've been here before." "I remember someone who was. I carry her in my lattice. Memory is a road map with ghosts." "Good enough," Ree said. "I'll put you there. After that, your math without me." They docked again in a shadow mouth that smelled like ozone and bargain. Callen and Taliath disembarked into a corridor that was both market and hallway, people moving with the speed of those who always look behind them. An android with flowers painted on its cheeks traded in counterfeit chips. A child held a bowl of soup whose steam wrote poetry in air. A woman with eyes like knives sold coins from dead planets. Callen felt his senses overload and reset. He wasn't cold. He wasn't alone. He was alive, and it meant making a choice every 5 seconds. It meant hunger and hope and the gamble of moving forward. They wove through crowds with their shoulders touching. A vendor yelled after them in a dialect that wanted to be friendly and threatening at once. Taliath bought 2 scarves with a gesture and threw one around Callen's neck. He laughed and let it hang loose. He didn't know why the gesture felt so big. He decided to let it. They found a door painted with a sun and knocked a rhythm that Taliath knew without remembering where she had learned it. The door opened on a room that looked like a memory of home. Old chairs, light that knew how to fall on wood, a kettle heating on a coil. A woman sat at a desk, eyebrows raised, a mechanic, a smuggler, a grandmother. "You bring weather with you," she said to Taliath, "and you bring that look." She waved a hand at Callen, the one that says, "I've seen the worst and decided to keep going." "We need passage," Taliath said, "off this ring, south line, dust route. Payment." "A song," Taliath said, smiling with only one corner of her mouth. The woman barked a laugh. "My favorite currency." She leaned back, but before that, tea. She poured. The steam smelled like a field after rain. Callen held the cup and warmed his fingers and swallowed and felt the heat carve a path down his throat that the cold had once owned. He closed his eyes. He opened them to find the woman watching him with a gentle pity that didn't sting. "You saved her," she said. "It will make you enemies and friends you'll regret." "Worth it," he said. She nodded. "Good answer." They made arrangements. They took a narrow freighter that pretended to haul ore and actually hauled people like heartbreak across the black. Taliath stood near the porthole and watched stars wheel, unreadable. Callen stood beside her and watched her face, also unreadable, and learned to read silence. They slept in bunks that had held despair and hope in turns. He dreamed of the snow again, but this time the wind was singing and the song sounded like 1,000 voices layered into one. He woke to Taliath humming that pitch, soft, as if smoothing a wrinkle in the universe. He reached across the narrow space and put his hand around her wrist like one anchor touching another. She did not pull away. At the dust route's far end was another world the color of rust, its sky thin, its buildings close. No corporation owned it. It owned itself in the way a small town owns its name. They disembarked and the air smelled like hot iron and frying oil and story. Taliath breathed and said, "Here." "Here what?" "Here we start," she said simply. They built a life from pieces. They rented a room over a market where the fruit was always too ripe. Callen took a job repairing atmospheric monitors and learned to swear in 3 new tongues. Taliath found work reading old languages the Foundry had abandoned. She sat in a library with vents in the floor that breathed warmth. When she laughed once, an old man looked up and cried, and then laughed too, and refused to explain either. Their names started to travel not as criminals or property, but as a pair. The stories made them larger and smaller than they were. In bars, people said the human gave his jacket to a statue, and it came alive. Children whispered that the blue woman sang open doors and hearts and safes. None of it was the truth, and all of it was true. Sometimes nights were long and their room filled with a memory of white. Callen would sit up and stare at the wall and feel the old dread in his chest like a wolf that had learned his door. Taliath would wake without moving and hum the note that reminded his bones that they were here and not there. He would breathe and the world would come back to him piece by piece. Roof, wall, her face. Sometimes it was her nights that stretched. She would go still and her eyes would look at a point in the air that no one else could see, where her lattice played a history she had not requested. He learned then not to touch her until she returned from whatever past had reached in and taken her hand. When she blinked and found herself, he would say, "Here," and she would put the back of her fingers against his throat to measure the beat and believe in the present. Word eventually reached the Foundry. It could not be otherwise. A whisper, a record, a contract stumbled on a file with the shape of a woman in it. A price was set. It came with men who went very quiet when they looked at her and then tried to go quieter when he looked at them. They came to the market. They came to the library. A man with a peeled-faced smile asked Callen to walk without fuss. Callen pretended to tie his boot and broke the man's knee with the same motion. No one saw because everyone saw, and the city was kind in that specific way. They were not alone. Ree Dow's name arrived on their comm in 3 letters that meant run, then wait, then open the door. She had friends. She owed them and they owed her. They offered a ship whose captain was deaf to contracts and fluent in songs that cities sang when governments slept. They suggested a new place beyond Vespera's reach, on the blue edge of a nebula where Foundry contracts decayed like steel left in salt water. Run, Callen asked, standing at the window. The city outside wore evening like a dress it liked. He loved it the way one loves a bruise that tells you you're alive. Taliath stood beside him. "We have been running since you pulled me out of snow," she said. "But there is running toward, and there is running away. Let's do the first." They left quietly. The city pretended not to notice. A child they had fed soup to once saluted with a gesture he'd invented and refused to explain. The librarian pressed a book into Taliath's hand with blank pages. "Right," he said. "The universe lacks certain words." They walked to the dock. The ship there looked unfinished and proud. The captain had hair like a wire brush and a grin like a fox. "You're the ones who made security lower their guns with a whisper," she said. "Climb aboard. I'll try not to kill you with my cooking." They boarded. They left. The world they'd named here shrank in the window to a bead of rust. Taliath watched, and a line of light moved slowly down her throat where the plate hit her lattice, as if she was mapping the shape of letting go. In the weeks that followed, Callen learned the way stars look when viewed through the skin of a ship held together by love and patchwork. Taliath taught crew children how to make their throats vibrate to feel the texture of silence. Callen sat in the galley and wrote letters to himself he never sent. He gave Ree Dow's name to a harbor master who took a bribe and a promise of better days. They traded favors like seed pods that might sprout into shelter later. And always there was the Foundry's shadow. It grew and shrank. It passed over them like a cloud. It broke into rain sometimes. They managed. They adapted. They endured. This is what humans do when given a new verb. One night at a quiet point in a long dark stretch, alarms woke the ship. A Foundry cutter had pinned them in a cusp between star winds. The captain cursed with creativity. Taliath stood and her voice fell into the room like a hand on a fevered brow. "Not this time," she said. She walked to the comm. She opened the plate at her throat. She sang, not a song but the beginning of one, a few notes that caught the cutter's control software like burrs in a fine hem. The cutter stuttered, recovered, stuttered again. "They'll escalate," the captain warned. "Let them," Taliath said, and her second pitch aligned with something that sounded like math and mercy meeting in a corridor. On the screen, the cutter's nose dipped. It did not fire. It drifted. The captain altered course with hands that were both art and panic. The ship slid past the cutter like a whisper past an ear. The moment thinned and then thickened into safety. The crew exhaled in a small wave. Callen realized he had been holding his breath for an hour that lasted 10 seconds. Taliath closed the plate. She swayed. Callen reached her. He held her up with both hands and his heart climbed out of his chest and stood on the table to look around. "You can't keep doing that," he said, not angry but terrified. "I know," she said, "but we can do it when we must." She put her forehead to his for 1 second, the gesture fierce and bewildered and absolutely right. "Because you took off your coat," she added in a whisper, "and there was room in me for something else." He closed his eyes and saw snow that was not ice but a sheet on a bed on a night with too little sleep and too many stars. He realized then that what they had built was not a mistake dressed as a miracle. It was a life. He decided to keep it. Time did what it does. It changed the shape of things while insisting it had not. They bought passage with promises and promises with work. They crossed borders drawn on maps and maps drawn on breath. Taliath sent pieces of herself like letters into corners of the net where they would germinate into a resistance not of guns, but of fuses and songs. Callen taught a small colony on a rock the trick of triangulating storms with empty cans and wire. He gave a coat to a child who thought he was being knighted. He took training in things he didn't think he'd ever need and needed weeks later when Foundry scouts cornered them on a station made of scaffolding and regret. They won sometimes. They lost sometimes. They kept going. One afternoon, drifting above a planet the color of tarnished silver, they intercepted a distress call thin as a thread. It spoke of a research pod adrift on upper winds, of oxygen dwindling, of someone singing softly to themselves because breathing wanted rhythm. The crew looked at Callen without looking. He looked at Taliath. She looked back. No words were necessary. The captain rolled the ship on a dime and they dropped into atmosphere with the grace of a bird remembering how to land. High winds battered them. The pod was a bright needle on churning cloud. They matched speed. Callen suited up and clipped to the airlock like a burn to a lighter. Taliath put her hand to his helmet. "You'll freeze," she said, and her voice had fear at its edges like frost. "I've done it before," he said, and smiled and jumped. The air felt like knives. He grabbed the pod's ring and slammed his mag boot to it and wrenched the hatch. Inside was a woman with skin the color of copper and eyes that had gone very still. He pulled his jacket off, history repeating as wisdom not error, and threw it around her. She protested. He swore. They argued. He won. He linked her to his harness and the ship reeled them home like fish on a line. Back on deck, the rescued woman coughed and coughed again and looked from the human to the blue woman and understood a story that had been a rumor and now had a face. She said, voice raspy, "Why would you risk so much for a stranger?" Callen shrugged, the movement small and complicated. "Because someone risked for me," he said, "and because I like being the kind of person who does." Taliath stood behind him and put a hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were warm. The crew moved around them with a grateful bustle that looked like fate. The ship hummed a new note. That night the stars were a ceiling of pins. Taliath and Callen lay in the cargo bay, backs on canvas, shoulders touching. The ship breathed around them. "We keep doing this," she said. "Pulling threads will change the pattern of the cloth." "Maybe that's the point," he said. He turned his head and met her gaze. "Maybe the Foundry made you to preserve, but we're built to alter. What happens if you do both?" "We write new histories," she said softly, "and we remember them. And we survive," he said. "And we endure," she said. Her hand slid into his. They looked at the ceiling of a cargo bay that had seen heartbreak and salvage and saw something like a sky. Years later, though years is the wrong unit for lives lived on ships, they would hear of a planet already in revolt when the Foundry ships arrived. The machines would find that doors did not open to their frequency anymore, that minds did not sing for them, that oxygen recyclers refused to mesh with their code. Someone had taught the infrastructure to listen for a different note. The chorus of Casimir, the Foundries of old, would draw breath and find it snagging. The war would arrive anyway because war does, but it would find itself less welcome than before, and that would matter. On a night before any of that, Taliath and Callen descended once more to a world of snow, not Vespera's shelf but a sister. The storm there was young. They walked out into it with better gear and worse fears. The wind pounded them, old as time. They reached a ridge and found, half buried, a figure whose skin was gray as steel and whose hair was a tangle of wire. Callen looked at Taliath. Taliath looked at Callen. No words. He took off his jacket. She took off hers. They wrapped the figure with both. The cold bit and they did not flinch. Together they pulled someone back from the edge of forgetfulness. Together, the universe shivering around them, they carried life forward one more meter. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.